Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's DevOps Chat. I'm really delighted to have Larry Maccherone with me. I first came across Larry at one of the Lean Kanban conferences in the UK. I was really impressed with the work he was doing then. So, Larry, thanks for agreeing to take part.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great stuff. Perhaps you could begin by telling us a little bit about your background, what you've done in the past, and also what your interests are now and what you're working on currently.
Sure. So my background is defined by almost three completely different interests and areas. I started my first business while I was still an undergrad at Virginia Tech, and we did factory floor automation process controls. Our biggest client was actually GE Power Generation. So we were controlling these huge turbine machines that were hooked up to the power grid. So safety and security became very critical because it's the power grid. If the bad guys take over it, they can shut down the power grid. So I really got interested in safety and security aspects of systems design and software development. And then I ended up at Carnegie Mellon, essentially in a security role there at Carnegie Mellon. And while I was there, I got hooked on Agile transformation and statistical analysis and metrics. So those three things, safety, security, and software development, Agile transformation, and metrics essentially define my career so far.
And it's interesting you mentioned metrics and statistics, because that's of course the talk that I saw you give at London Lean Kanban. And I think, so what was interesting was you looked at what do the statistics tell you about what works and what doesn't. And some of your findings confirmed popular beliefs, but some kind of were at odds with popular belief. So I know it's perhaps not the main topic for today, but perhaps you can just tell me one or two of the things you think were most surprising about that work that you did at that time.
Okay, let me give a little more background to other folks who maybe haven't heard the setup of what I did. So while I was at Carnegie Mellon, I started giving talks on using metrics in an Agile environment.
Yeah.
And then I got job offers out of those public talks. I was still at Carnegie Mellon, still executive director of a cybersecurity group, still working on a PhD in software engineering metrics. But then I went to work for Rally Software. And the reason I went to work for Rally is that they had this huge data set of 10,000 teams, is the data set I started with. And I thought that if I could crawl around in those, I could either validate or invalidate a lot of the folklore anecdote that has been around software engineering in general and Agile in particular. There was less research on Agile. And so as you said, I studied roughly 50, 60 different behaviors, attitudes, practices, and correlated them with 4 measures of performance: predictability, productivity, quality, defect-freeness aspect of quality, and responsiveness. And we had some most of what we did, maybe 9 out of 10 of what we found, confirmed the folklore, but 1 out of 10, as you point out, denied the folklore. And so probably the most well, there's two things that sort of denied it. One is the extreme degree to which certain behaviors influence in a positive way. We all know that keeping your whip low is good, but the extremeness of how it impacts both responsiveness and quality, it can have a 4-fold increase in quality and having lower defects. That was surprising. But some of the findings, like co-location, that's, the recommended thing is to put everyone in one team room. We found that people who work from home a few days a week or are distributed in the same time zone actually have higher productivity levels as a team than everyone in one group on average. Now there's variation in these groups, and we compared the upper quartiles and the lower quartiles and did the whole analysis in a statistically valid way. But in general, I can state that finding was not true. Now, once you went distributed beyond the same time zone, then the Agile recommendations, comes back into play. Perhaps the most controversial and interesting finding we had to do with the gender makeup of the team.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So even a team with a single female on it, as opposed to all male teams, greatly outperformed all male teams under most circumstances. There were a couple of exceptions to that. And, other social safety factors, other sort of squishy, softer factors tended to have a bigger influence than we expected it to have on the performance.
And just because it's highly topical, because we had Women's Day just a few days ago, and
yesterday here in the States.
And one of my colleagues was tweeted out saying, gender diversity isn't all about a kind of nice fluffy thing. It actually it enhances your business performance. And I suppose what you're saying there is your research absolutely backed that up, that just having just one woman on a team radically transformed the productivity and the capability of that team to deliver. So it's a very, very topical point to make. So it's a good time to draw that out. So I suppose it's interesting. You early on in your career, this interested in kind of security, having secure code, secure systems. Later on, this interest in statistics and in Agile. And at what point did you also then become interested in DevOps, perhaps as a thing that has become more popular and more widely known about in the last few years?
So while I was at Carnegie Mellon, there was another person I was working closely with there named Nooper Davis. I'm actually working with her again here in my work here at Comcast. She was also interested in both security and in Agile transformation sort of topics. So we were, we had long, fun conversations. We made a proposal to the Department of Homeland Security to improve the state of the practice of cybersecurity for development teams. Our theory was that too much of security was bolt-on by security experts after the development team was done. Mm-hmm. And we thought that if we could take more of an Agile transformation approach and have the development team take ownership, just like when development teams added testers and added QA folks, basically that was part of the Agile movement, is that those separate silos disappeared and they all became part of the development team. Our idea was to bring the security folks into the development team in a similar sort of way. We proposed this to DHS, got millions of dollars worth of funding. It's called the Build Security In initiative, as opposed to Bolt It On. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it did okay. There's still a lot of people using it. There's maybe 50 companies I know of that are using that framework, the Build Security In framework. But it was missing one key thing. The key thing that it was missing was that the ops folks were still a silo.
Right. Okay.
And back then. And so it wasn't until DevOps came along that this concept really, I thought, could really take root. And so I'm reviving it. I'm renaming it. I'm calling it DevSecOps. I have a manifesto associated with it. It's, the first line of the manifesto is build it in more than bolted on, kind of, build security in more than bolted on. Yep. So it's stated in the Agile manifesto style, where there's something on the left that's of more higher value than the something on the right. There's still value in bolt-on activities like pen testing and red team activities, but for the most part, you want the developers to do it and the testers on the development team to essentially. So that's where my DevOps angle sort of comes from.
Right. I see. So very much what you're saying is that you had this interest in security, writing secure systems, making sure that's built in. You looked at how do you address that in what many people would call the Agile world, the development side. But of course, that's not going. You're not going to get the full benefit unless it's not just about the development of the system, but also the deployment, the operation, the ongoing maintenance of the system. And that's where you became interested in DevOps. And I think and now you've got this term DevSecOps. And you gave a talk recently on DevSecOps. So what sort of topics were you covering in that presentation?
So let me give you an idea of first how I think of DevOps, which there's a million different definitions. Yep. You probably had a different definition for every interview you've done in this DevOps series. My definition, my flavor of
the one right definition that you're about to tell us. Yep.
So the folks that take a tool-oriented definition, I actually agree with those folks to a certain degree, but that's not the whole picture, and that's not the part that I choose to emphasize. I mean, it's basically developers taking responsibility for how their product behaves in production. When they do that, they make fundamentally different decisions, especially prioritization decisions. So if the developers get called in on a Saturday to go fix some production problem, as opposed to the ops guys mitigating and stabilizing the system and waiting till Monday to mention it to the development team, then on Monday when the developers go into their planning session, they're much more likely to say, if I just had this extra information in the log, I could have figured out the problem in a fraction of the time. And if I just had this lever in the product, I could have mitigated the problem in a fraction of the time. And I know Ops has been asking for that for years, and we've been ignoring them. But now that we own it, we're going to prioritize it. That happen. It fundamentally changes the decisions that they're making. So it's that taking ownership, that taking responsibility aspect that I emphasize. And with DevSecOps, it's essentially just adding security to that equation as well. The practices, the activities that security folks do in a bolt-on fashion, a lot of them can be done by the developers in a continuous fashion, where the primary goal is not to gate release to production, but the primary goal is to give feedback to the developers for learning so that they write fundamentally more secure products from that point forward. So
that's going to then almost force me to ask a cheeky question and put you on the spot. So I think there are people that have the view that with a more waterfall, a more linear approach to development, it's easier to develop a more secure system because you can have a more of a gate, more of a check. What's your view on that? Is that true? Is it more nuanced than that?
It is absolutely not true, in my opinion.
Okay.
It is the opposite of true. It is a security theater. Like a lot of what they do is just to basically say, yep, we have some liability coverage.
Yeah.
In case we get sued or somebody wants to blame somebody, point something. We had the security audit done. We did our best, kind of thing. But really, if the outcomes you're looking for are to preserve your reputation, that's usually the thing that security hurts the most is your reputation. So you're looking at the number of incidents where people, data has gotten out that shouldn't have gotten out, or people have changed things or influenced things that they shouldn't have had influence over. Then having the developers build it in as opposed to bolt it on is much, much, much better. Let me give you, for example, the best static scanning, security scanning tools out there only find between 20 and 30% of all the vulnerabilities in a product. So if that's the case, that means that 70 to 80% of them are getting shipped now anyway. Yeah. So it's not that hard for a development team to do much better than that, especially if you take a learning approach. And let me give you an example going back to Deming and the quality world. People used to think, well, let's inspect every widget as it comes off the factory line, and then let's send the ones that don't pass inspection back through rework. And then somebody, Deming in particular, and he started it, but a lot of people took off, especially the Toyota manufacturing system. A lot of people basically said, well, what if we don't inspect them as they come off at the end of the line? What if we have measurement and feedback very early in the process so that we can tell when the process is starting to drift towards a direction where it might produce something that would not pass eventually? Yeah. And then everything that comes off the line is Six Sigma level quality. I mean, so the Motorola handsets, the little walkie-talkies, the first time they were ever turned on was when the user that bought it put the batteries in it and turned it on at their house. They got that confident in their process to produce a perfectly good product that they never tested it as a whole handheld unit. And they had very close to 100% perfect quality. That's the attitude I'm taking. If you do it during the process, if you make feedback for the developers be the primary goal, then you produce fundamentally more secure products.
So it's interesting there, isn't it? Because you've talked there about having earlier feedback loops. And what I'm thinking a little bit here is if we talk about bugs, delivering bug-free software, I think we can now fairly confidently say that having things like automated builds, automated tests, running frequently, providing feedback, releasing more frequently so that developers get feedback about the software more frequently actually leads to higher quality software. If we talk about lack of defects, lower numbers of defects. So, and that, I suppose the reason I say that is I think for a long time there was this argument that with waterfall you got more reliable software because you had a big test phase, and with Agile or with DevOps it's less reliable because you're releasing more frequently, so you can't possibly be building something that's as high quality. Turns out that's not true. You can have higher quality, and this comes back a little bit to what you said about WIP, that actually responsiveness, a more responsive team that can deliver more stuff more frequently actually can also deliver something at a higher level of quality. It sounds to me like you're saying the same can apply with how secure the code is. It's not just a question of it can be as good, it can be better than if you just have a quality check, a gate in the process. So what I'm interested in is, because with bugs, I understand it. I know what kind of unit testing and code reviews, pair programming, those sorts of techniques you use for quality. So what are there tools, are there techniques that teams can apply to try and build that in?
Yeah, so there's a whole landscape of security testing tools, application security testing tools. The landscape, there's various different types of these tools. Let me give you a few examples of the most popular types. One is called static analysis. This is essentially automated code review. It's another program that's looking at your code and looking for patterns that are vulnerabilities. These products can be tricked, though, with automated class loaders and dynamic languages, and there's lots of high false positive rates, meaning that maybe only 1 out of 5 things that it finds is actually a real vulnerability, and so developers quickly lose interest in tracking all those down, unless you're really careful about how you roll it out and all that, and they miss 70 to 80% of the vulnerabilities that are in there. Another type of tool, and that can be run in a build system. So when I say that DevOps is perfect fertile ground for this concept I was trying to introduce 10 years ago with the Build Security Initiative, the fact that you have a CI mechanism means you've given me a place to put that in.
Somewhere to hook it in. Yeah.
To hook it in and give more rapid feedback to the development team. So another example of a tool is called, the term now the industry has adopted is software composition analysis, but I used to refer to it as dependency checkers, because most of the software you're shipping is not written by your people. Most of it is the libraries and frameworks that your people pull in nowadays. So if there's publicly reported vulnerabilities against those libraries, version 1.2 might have a vulnerability and it's fixed in 1.3. These tools look to see what dependencies you have, what versions of what products you have, and then they go look up in public databases like the CVE, and they basically tell you, you have to upgrade to 1.4 to get away from these type of bugs. And so there's another example of a security tool you can use, and there's 2 or 3 others that are very common, fuzz testing and a few others.
Okay, so and that's the tooling side. Are there also more kind of practice-based things that developers have to do or people on the team have to learn about and understand in order to develop more secure code on a frequent basis?
Right, I have a list of 9 disciplines that I essentially say a mature DevSecOps team will be doing. And tools are maybe, I don't know, a third of them, just like DevOps is maybe defined a third or more by the tooling. The other 2/3, though, are practices, as you say. So let me give you an example of one of those practices. threat modeling. So, if you throw the product over the wall to a security team, they don't necessarily know who the users are, how it's going to be used in production. They don't necessarily have a good ability to identify all the attack vectors. Plus, they don't know the code, so they have a tough time finding out whether those are valid attack vectors for this code base or not. But if you get the development team to start identifying their own attack vectors, then those become backlog items that they can work through. So that's one of the practices is ramping teams up on threat modeling. And the way we're doing that here at the work that I'm doing at Comcast is very viral or federated. So we had a few folks that sort of have done this in the past, essentially lead workshops where maybe an hour of it is slideware, but the other 7 hours of it is they brought their architecture block diagram into the room, and we started talking about how potential ways to attack this, and then we started talking about potential ways to mitigate. So it's really very much about learning, and then anyone who attends 2 of these is then qualified to facilitate.
Right, and another workshop.
We only had 1 or 2 people that were qualified. Now we have a lot more people that are qualified, and it's spreading throughout the organization.
Fantastic. But I suppose still fundamentally that means that it needs to be part of the, people on the team need to have it as part of their skill set, their ability, alongside the other more traditional skills around testing and developing code and architecture and design. Okay, so it's fascinating. I'm keeping an eye on the time. I think it's been really interesting for me, particularly to understand that journey you've been through to get to sort of what you're thinking about and what you're doing now. I pretty much always ask if we can finish on a top tip of some kind. So I suppose if and it kind of puts you on the spot, but if someone came to you and said, look, my team doesn't really do this. We have a separate security department. The guys on my team aren't doing anything around security. How would you suggest they get started? What would be the starting point for improving that?
I guess the starting point would be to understand and adopt the DevSecOps manifesto. I mean, the bullets in there fundamentally define a paradigm shift. Build it in versus bolt it on. Rely on development teams more than security experts. Focus on culture change more than policy enforcement. I mean, these are basically the paradigm shifts you need to make. Mm-hmm. And it's very similar to the paradigm shifts that had to happen when QA got pulled onto the development team and Ops is now being pulled onto the development team.
It's so interesting for me because obviously we've had a lot of people contribute to DevOpsChat, and I ask this question frequently, and what surprises me is how often, even for things that might seem quite technical at the outset, the advice that comes back is often much more focused on the culture, the philosophy, right, the why, if that makes sense. So it's interesting again that your advice is not install this tool or start using this practice. It's actually start looking at the big picture and what we're trying to achieve by working in more of a DevSecOps way. So that's awesome advice, and I encourage everyone to go and read the DevSecOps manifesto.
I need to get a blog post out about it before you ship this thing so you can link to it.
Yeah, fantastic. So
I've got a talk out about it, but I haven't posted a blog about it, but I can do that in the next few days.
Great. I think so. So thank you again for taking some time to speak to me now. I'm really looking forward to the Twitter chat itself, having, people interact with you and with each other around this topic, which is, it's a great topic to be discussing at this time. So thanks again, Larry, and look forward to the Twitter chat.
Thank you very much. I look forward to it too.